gonna say, do you think it was his relationship with Jann Wenner? Was that I haven't read Jan's book, but I'm sure he mentions Elton a few times in there. He must, because it was a, Rolling Stone, that it was that interview, right, where he said he was bisexual. And um do
Yeah.
you think, like, like, I'm sure they've knocked heads a number of times, probably a poor review in Rolling Stone. I'm sure Elton reads reviews, especially in the 70s. That was probably important to him.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting in his own biography, he'll note that a record got a bad review, and sometimes he'll agree and say, yeah, it wasn't that good. I mean, you put out so many albums, they can't all be great, and or not every song on them is going to be great. But I can't really think of any other Rolling Stone stories. I haven't read Jan's book yet. I read the book he didn't like, Sticky Fingers, which that was very entertaining, and you'd probably both like that.
I love that book. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and the whole story about it, how the guy said, well, yeah, you can do factual corrections, but I don't want it to be authorized. But of course, that's why we have Jan's book, because he didn't like that other one. So he's putting this one out to set the record straight. Um, I don't know. I think maybe he was more beloved in Rolling Stone in the 70s anyway. I can't think of, there's one story in Sticky Fingers where the writer had turned his story on George Harrison, and then he was horrified to pick up the magazine and see how it had been changed to make it more negative. And he was so upset that he sent George Harrison his original text and said, this is what I wrote originally. And George said later he was very glad he got that, because whoever wrote that other story was a real jerk, or I think he said it in harsher terms.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a big deal for Elton to sort of come out. I mean, saying he was bisexual, and he really, when it seemed like practically all the relationships he had were with men. So I thought it was, kind of a stretch. Or now I think that. Certainly I didn't at the time. I think people today can't really appreciate how big a story that was. Um, and what a big deal it was for someone to say even that much. I mean, it was reported on one of the national news networks,
Yeah.
which you really can't imagine that happening now, unless it was, I don't know, some huge, yeah, a president or something, But it was kind of, you couldn't even say the word. You'd have to sort of whisper. Even in that interview,
Yeah.
he hedges a bit, and it was still considered controversial. And some people wouldn't play his records, and his sales started going down, though he contended they were sort of going down anyway. Maybe it kind of meshed the two of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, you think of then later in the 80s. I don't think there was a comparable Elton cover. But remember in the 80s they had the cover with David Bowie on it, and the headline said David Bowie straight. Remember that one?
Opposite news.
And he was sort of forswearing all his wild 70s stuff.
Yeah.
Uh,
That
Go ahead,
Hmm.
Al.
No, that's funny. It just made me think about if a president came out, that would be big news. But I think if we had a gay president, it wouldn't be news necessarily. But if a president came out during his presidency, that would be the news.
Yeah, yeah.
Just
Yeah, well, that
I don't think a rock star though would get on like the CBS evening news for coming out though these days. Not at all.
yeah, I was wondering. Yeah, did you do any research on, like, when he came out, when he said he was bisexual, if there was other news articles or boycotts, or like, shocked, and we're not going to play, radio stations say, why
Well,
we're
there
not going
was
to play.
that. I mean, in his autobiography, he contends there wasn't. But then if you look at things that came out at the time, he says that there was a bit of blowback. So, there obviously was some pushback at the time, and some radio stations in the South. Well, I said the South. I don't know. It was the South. Some radio stations did not play his music after that for a bit anyway. I mean, he ran into the same thing later when he was working on his movie Rocket Man, based on his life. And he said when he was talking with different, well, they produce, but money backers at different studios, and some of them were saying, well, can you tone down the gay stuff a bit for it's for a PG rating. And he said this in The Guardian. He said, I haven't lived a PG rated life. So he didn't. And if you see the movie, it's not really explicit. But it does make the case that yes, this is a gay man who had relationships with men. That's pretty much all you do. But in some places around the globe, they've excised those scenes or not shown the movie because of that. He just didn't want it to be, kind of whitewashed the way Bohemian Rhapsody was, I think.
Yeah, why couldn't he just be a straight man like Liberace, who clearly never, he never came out. He never declared his sexuality. He was a straight man. He was a man's man.
In London, a paper had printed some sort of innuendos. They didn't call him gay because you couldn't be that explicit then, but they just had some innuendos pointing that way, and he sued the paper and he won. So
yeah, no, that's how important it was. You really had
them for telling the truth, and he won anyway.